She was the quiet joke of Riverside Memorial Hospital, until the night a blood-soaked Air Force captain stumbled through the trauma doors, locked eyes with her, and raised his hand in a perfect salute. What followed left the entire emergency floor frozen in disbelief. Welcome back to the channel. Before we dive in, drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? I love seeing our community spread across the globe. The ER was drowning in chaos that evening. Monitors screamed, stretchers rolled in back to back, and exhaustion clung to the air like disinfectant. At the far end of the nurses' station stood Lila Bennett, hands still, posture careful, gold scrubs catching the light beneath the overhead lamps. To most staff, she was just the new girl, quiet, too reserved, easy to overlook. Especially by the people who made sure she stayed in the background. "Someone grab a real trauma nurse," Dr. Preston Vance muttered, flipping through digital charts with impatience. His tone was flat, dismissive, like Lila's presence was an inconvenience rather than part of the team. Bethany smirked without hiding it. Jordan pretended not to hear, though his eyes flicked sideways with silent judgment. It was only Lila's sixth shift. 6 shifts of being corrected, minimized, nudged aside. None of them knew about the years she'd spent in a different uniform. None knew about the medals tucked away in a drawer. None knew the reason her hands trembled when sirens echoed down the hall wasn't fear. Old muscle memory never truly dies. Lila kept her head down and continued organizing trauma trays with precise movements. She spoke little, listened much, and carried her skill quietly like a hidden blade. Better they didn't know. Better they never asked. Some histories were locked away for good reason. The night shift had barely begun when the overhead speakers crackled with urgency. Incoming military trauma, multiple lacerations, suspected TBI, ETA 3 minutes. For a moment, everything around Lila dimmed. Those words hit her chest harder than anyone could see. Something old shifted awake inside her, something she'd buried under routine and silence. She turned, too sharp, too alert, and Bethany caught it. "Nervous already?" Bethany whispered. "Try not to faint when the blood starts flowing." Lila swallowed the comment and kept her face neutral. She'd survived war, combat zones, smoke-choked skies and rotors whipping sand into her eyes. Yet here, inside a well-lit hospital, she felt more judged than she ever had overseas. Doors slammed open. 2 paramedics burst through, pushing a gurney streaked with crimson. Captain Garrett Flynn, flight suit shredded down the side, blood running from a deep head gash, was barely holding consciousness. The rank patch on his chest caught the surgical lights like a badge of fire. Dr. Vance stepped forward instantly. "Possible skull fracture. Prep for emergency craniotomy. Move." Lila's hands moved before thought could catch her, setting up airway support, clearing carts, establishing monitors. Bethany nudged Jordan and rolled her eyes like it was funny she was even trying. "Think she even knows which end of the scalpel to hand over?" Bethany murmured. But Lila didn't hear them anymore. She was watching Captain Flynn, his breathing rhythm, the lag in his pupil response, the strange path the blood tracked down his cheek instead of pooling behind his ear like a typical intracranial bleed. Something didn't add up. The trauma team lifted him onto the table. Anesthesiologist counting down meds, Vance calling orders. Surgical prep accelerating toward a decision that could alter the rest of this man's life. Then, a flicker. Captain Flynn's eyes opened, glazed, searching, until they found her. His right arm rose, slow, trembling, blood slipping down his wrist, but precise. His palm touched his temple, a perfect salute. The entire room snapped to stillness. Jordan whispered, "Why is he saluting the new nurse?" Vance stared, confused, then followed Flynn's gaze to Lila. Her skin drained of color. Her hands, once trembling, went rigid with memory. Flynn's lips moved, voice broken but unmistakable. "Raven 7. If you think you know where this is going, you're probably wrong. Hit that subscribe button because what happens next will completely change how you see this story. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. Lila's breath caught like someone had punched the past back into her lungs. 5 years. 5 years since anyone had spoken that call sign. Bethany's confusion replaced her smirk. What does that even mean? Lila stepped forward without realizing her feet had moved. The walls felt closer, the trauma lights hotter, and the man bleeding out on the table wasn't just a patient, not to her. He was a memory she never meant to face again. And just like that, everything she'd tried to lock away, the uniform, the missions, the desert heat, the wreckage, came rushing back. Raven 7. Her old life. Spoken by the one person who could prove it existed. The past she ran from was standing right in front of her, and bleeding fast. The monitor snapped her back. Captain Garrett Flynn's heart rate was skittering across the screen, numbers climbing and dropping like they couldn't decide whether to live or quit. Blood still ran in a dark river from the gash that carved from his temple down along his jaw, soaking the collar of his flight suit. The right side of his face was almost unrecognizable, swollen, slick, and crimson under the harsh ER lights. "Enough with the drama," Dr. Preston Vance barked, as if the salute had been some kind of stunt. "We're losing time. Get neuro on the line. This is a probable skull fracture with intracranial bleed." He leaned over the tablet in his hand. Flicking through scans the paramedics had transmitted en route. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before his brain starts herniating. Prep for emergency craniotomy." A tech rushed to obey. The room lurched into motion again, gloves snapping, instruments clattering onto metal trays, the anesthesiologist drawing up meds. Lila's hands were shaking so hard she had to curl them into fists. Bethany, standing at the next cart, noticed and smirked. "Relax, Bennett. You're just observing," Bethany said under her breath. "Let the big kids handle this one." They all thought the tremor was fear. It wasn't. Her body remembered this rhythm. Alarms, shouted orders, metallic blood in the air. It remembered kneeling beside men in shredded uniforms while rotors thundered overhead. It remembered being the person everyone looked to when the difference between life and death came down to 60 seconds and a steady pair of hands. "Airway," Lila heard herself say automatically. She moved toward Flynn's head, reaching to adjust the mask, slipping sideways. His breathing was too shallow, too noisy. If his airway closed down while they were busy arguing about his skull, none of the rest would matter. "Bennett, no." Vance's voice cracked like a whip. "Back off. You're not lead on this case. Stand by the wall and stay out of the way." The words burned worse than the disinfectant. For a second she froze, caught between instinct and the chain of command she was supposed to respect now. She stepped back. On the other side of the gurney, Jordan and another doctor in a white coat worked lines into Flynn's arms, their faces tight with focus. Bethany hovered near Vance, handing over instruments like she was auditioning for a commercial about competent nurses. Only Garrett Flynn seemed to know she existed. He drifted in and out, lids fluttering. His mouth formed fragments that didn't belong to this fluorescent world, half-finished syllables, clipped phrases that sounded too much like radio chatter. "Dust off, contact left, Raven." Each broken word landed like shrapnel in Lila's chest. Is he talking about her?" Jordan whispered, flicking his eyes toward Lila. "That salute. Who cares what he's talking about?" Vance snapped. "He's confused and hypoxic. That's what head injuries do. Bethany, let's move. I want him upstairs in 10. Lila forced herself to keep breathing. In, out. She watched the way the blood flowed from the wound, how it sheeted down the side of his face instead of pooling behind his ear. She watched his pupils. One sluggish, one responding a fraction faster than it should, but not like the textbook cases in Vance's lectures. Something about it was wrong. Not wrong like Vance thought. Wrong like the field cases she'd seen where the skull was intact, but the scalp and arteries did the lying. Her fingers twitched at her sides, wanting instruments she wasn't allowed to touch. "BP's dropping again," Jordan called out. 90 over 60 and falling. The anesthesiologist muttered a curse. "If we're going to do this, we need to do it now." Vance nodded. "All right, people, let's move. Craniotomy tray ready? Transfer in 3. Flynn's hand fell from the salute, muscles finally losing the battle. His eyes rolled back for a second, then snapped forward again, locking on Lila like he was dragging himself up from the bottom of a well just to see her. "Raven. 7. He rasped, louder this time. Every head turned. Bethany's eyebrows shot up. "What is that? Some code?" Jordan looked between Flynn and Lila, confusion narrowing his eyes. "Bennett? Why does he keep saying that?" Before we continue, real quick, if you're the type who scrolls past without subscribing, this story will prove why that's a mistake. The next thing reveals something most people never see coming. Don't be the person who misses it. Subscribe now. Heat crawled up Lila's neck. The room felt smaller, the walls pushing in, the air thinning. She could feel all of them waiting, doctors, nurses, even the paramedic lingering by the door, waiting for her to laugh it off, to shrug, to pretend she had no idea what the man on the table was talking about. But she knew. She knew the exact night his voice had crackled over her headset, hoarse and panicked, as flames clawed at a shattered fuselage. She knew how it felt to clamp her gloved hand over his bleeding leg while mortars thudded in the distance. She knew what it had cost her to walk away from that uniform and reinvent herself as just a nurse. And now the one person who could tear that mask off was lying in front of her while everyone else sharpened their scalpels over the wrong injury. Vance broke the silence first. "He's disoriented. Ignore the rambling and keep moving. We're not losing a captain on my table because everyone got sentimental." The team jolted back into motion. Only Lila stayed frozen for one more heartbeat, standing between two lives. The one she'd built here at Riverside Memorial, and the one that still echoed in a desert half a world away. For the first time since she'd walked into this hospital, the question hanging in the room wasn't just whether Captain Garrett Flynn would survive. It was a different question entirely, written on every stunned face. Who exactly was Lila Bennett? Who exactly was Lila Bennett? The question seemed to echo off the trauma bay tiles, but the answer wasn't in Portland. It was in a sky that smelled like jet fuel and dust. The roar of rotors and static-filled radio calls slammed back into Lila's mind so hard she could almost feel the heat again. Afghanistan, 2018. Forward Operating Base Kandahar. Then Sergeant Lila Bennett crouched in the open doorway of the rescue helicopter, harness clipped in, boots braced against the metal floor. Night vision green washed over a landscape of blackened hills and scattered fires. "Phoenix 1-2, target site ahead, crash confirmed," the pilot called over the headset. Lila's gloved fingers tightened around the rescue rope. Below, what had once been a helicopter was now a twisted skeleton of burning metal. Ammunition popped off in the wreckage like angry fireworks. The air smelled like burning plastic and hot sand. "Visual on survivors," she answered, voice steady. "At least 3, maybe 4. Requesting permission to insert." "Copy. You're clear, Phoenix 1-2. Be advised, enemy movement reported 1 click out. Make it fast." Fast she could do. Lila stepped out into the emptiness and dropped. The rope burned against her gloves as she slid, heat from the fire clawing up toward her. She hit the ground hard, knees bending, heart already racing. Shouts cut through the crackle of flames. Men trapped inside the wreck. "Para-rescue!" she yelled, sprinting toward the opening in the broken fuselage. "If you can hear me, call out!" A hoarse voice answered from inside. "Over here! Cockpit! Can't move my leg!" She shoved wreckage aside and squeezed through a jagged seam of metal. The interior was a nightmare. sparks raining from exposed wires, smoke thick enough to chew. She found him pinned in the cockpit, harness twisted, leg crushed under a section of framing. Then, Lieutenant Garrett Flynn. Even through the soot on his face, his rank patch and terrified eyes were clear. "You with me, Lieutenant?" she asked, already cutting harness straps. He blinked hard. "Who are you?" "Phoenix 1-2, she said. "And I'm not leaving you here." Her training wanted her to do a full assessment, to follow the neat sequence of steps written in manuals. The fire chewing closer to the cockpit said there was no time. His leg was bad. Bone fragments, torn flesh, swelling so severe the skin looked ready to split. Protocol said stabilize, splint, wait for the crash crew to help lift the debris. Reality said if she waited, they both burned. "Lieutenant, listen." She slid a tourniquet high on his thigh. "This is going to hurt, a lot." He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Just get my crew out." "There are more?" she shouted over another explosion. "Back compartment. 3 more." His voice faded, then came back sharp. "Don't let us die out here." Smoke thickened. Lila cinched the tourniquet down until he screamed, then forced herself not to stop. Cutting circulation before full evaluation broke protocol, but letting him bleed out obeyed nothing. "Forgive me later," she muttered, wedging her shoulder under the metal trapping his leg. With a guttural sound she didn't recognize as her own, she heaved. Something shifted. Pain lit up Flynn's face, but his body came free. "Stay awake," she ordered, dragging him clear of the worst of the flames. "You go to sleep. I have to drag you twice." He managed a ragged laugh that turned into a cough. "Copy that. Phoenix." She left him under the fragment of wing that still offered some cover and plunged back into the wreckage. 2 more airmen, barely conscious, bleeding heavily. A third, unresponsive and cold. She moved like a machine. Airway, bleeding, tourniquets, improvised splints. Somewhere in the chaos, she keyed her radio, barking coordinates, demanding a second bird and ground help. Rounds cracked in the distance. Small arms fire, edging closer. "Extraction window is closing, Phoenix 1-2, came the warning through her headset. "Not leaving them," she snapped. "I need 30 more seconds." She knew she was breaking rules, taking too long, staying too close to a volatile fuel load, making quick and dirty calls on injuries that deserved full teams and bright lights. But the alternative was 4 dead men and a report that said she'd done everything by the book. She chose them instead of the book. When she finally clipped the last survivor to the hoist line and signaled up, the heat was so intense she could feel the hair under her helmet singeing. As the winch yanked them skyward, the wrecked helicopter below groaned, metal twisting one last time. The explosion that followed turned night to white. Drop a comment right now if you think Lila made the right call, or if you think she should have followed protocol. I'll respond to every single one because this debate matters. And if you're not subscribed yet, you're missing stories like this every week. Fix that. The white glare dissolved into hospital fluoros. The trauma bay snapped back into focus. Monitors, masks, the sharp smell of antiseptic instead of burning fuel. Captain Garrett Flynn was right in front of her again. Older, but just as stubbornly alive, blood pooling along the side of his face instead of his leg. Every eye in the room was on Lila. Dr. Preston Vance was the first to speak. "You know this patient?" Bethany gave a low, mocking whistle. "Looks like our inexperienced nurse has a fan." Lila's throat felt tight, her voice coming out thinner than she liked. I served," she said. "We crossed paths." On the table, Flynn fought his way back to the surface of consciousness. His heart rate spiked. 110, 120, 130, ringing across the monitor. "Crossed paths?" His words were slurred but fierce. "You pulled me out of hell." The line on the monitor shot higher, 140, and climbing. "Okay, that's enough," Vance cut in, jaw tense. He stepped between them, as if he could physically block the past from bleeding into his trauma bay. Whatever history you two have, it waits. Right now, this man has a probable brain bleed, and the clock is ticking. He looked at Lila like he was daring her to argue. The smell of jet fuel still clung to her in her mind. The sound of that explosion still echoed behind her ribs. The gratitude in Flynn's eyes when she'd shoved him onto the hoist cable still burned brighter than the fire that almost killed them. But here, in Riverside Memorial, none of that mattered if he didn't survive the next hour. Lila swallowed hard, forcing the memories back into their box, for now. "Understood, Doctor," she said, though her gaze stayed on Flynn. Past and present crashed together in that cramped trauma bay. One man's life hanging between a surgeon convinced he was right, and a nurse who'd already saved this same soldier once in a very different war. Past and present collided in Lila's chest, but Dr. Preston Vance was already moving. "CT results are in," he said, snatching a tablet from a tech. He flicked through the images, jaw tightening with every swipe. "Here it is. Classic crescent-shaped subdural, midline shift, textbook hematoma." He turned the screen so the team could see, a ghostly gray image of a brain with a dark shadow along one side. "Everyone look," Vance ordered. "This is why he's confused. This is why his vitals are unstable. We crack the skull, relieve the pressure, he lives. We hesitate, he doesn't." The anesthesiologist stepped closer. "I've got meds ready, or 3 is prepped." Bethany nodded, already stripping off her soiled gloves for sterile ones. "I'll call upstairs and tell them we're bringing him now." Around the table, people moved with the calm urgency of professionals who'd done this 100 times. It should have been reassuring. It wasn't. From her position near the wall, Lila watched Captain Garrett Flynn like the scan on the tablet wasn't the whole story. Blood still traced a steady path from the split along his scalp, but it ran in a narrow river instead of pooling. The swelling bulged in a strange, localized ridge rather than the diffuse puffiness she remembered from true intracranial bleeds. His pupils, she couldn't stop checking them, weren't behaving the way Vance's old trauma lectures said they should. One was sluggish, yes, but not blown. His responses fluctuated, but there were flashes of clarity that didn't fit the diagnosis. Something's off. Her combat medic brain kept repeating it, a drumbeat beneath the noise. "You're just a nurse now," her fear whispered back. "Floor nurse. New. Replaceable. You speak up, and you'll be laughed out of this room." "BP's 95/55, Dr. Jordan Mills called out. "He's dropping again." The number punched through the fog. Vance didn't miss a beat. "We're out of time. Let's move. Anesthesia. Start induction. We're taking him up now." The anesthesiologist reached for Flynn's airway equipment. Lila's heart hammered so hard she thought they'd hear it over the monitors. If they drilled into his skull and she was right, they'd waste precious minutes chasing a bleed that wasn't there, while the real problem kept draining him dry. "You could be wrong," the cautious part of her argued. "You haven't practiced field medicine in years. What if you misread it? And what if you're right and you say nothing?" Her foot moved before the rest of her caught up. "Wait," she said. The word wasn't loud, but it cut straight through the room. Hands paused. The anesthesiologist froze. Jordan looked up from the blood pressure cuff. Flynn's eyelids fluttered again, like he'd heard her through the haze. Dr. Vance slowly turned. "Excuse me?" His voice carried the warning of a storm. Lila swallowed. Her throat was dry, but her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I need to examine him," she said. "Something's wrong with your diagnosis." For a full second, no one spoke. Then Bethany laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You need to examine him?" she repeated. "You're a floor nurse, Bennett. We have a scan. The doctor has a plan. Don't get in the way." Heat flared at the back of Lila's neck. but the trembling in her hands had finally stopped. Underneath the fear, a different muscle memory had taken over, the one that had let her work under tracer fire and rotor wash. She ignored Bethany. "It doesn't add up," Lila said, eyes on Vance. The blood flow pattern, the swelling line, his intermittent clarity. This isn't behaving like a subdural. Not the ones I've seen. Jordan frowned. What is she talking about? Vance's expression hardened. "We don't have time for a classroom discussion," he snapped. "The CT is clear. I've done this procedure more times than you've been on shift in this hospital, Bennett." "I know what the CT shows," Lila replied, surprising herself with how firm she sounded. "I'm saying it might not be what we think it is. Give me 30 seconds. The room held its breath. Finally, with a frustrated exhale, Vance stepped back half an inch. "Fine," he said. 30 seconds. Then we go." Bethany stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You can't be serious." "That's enough," Vance cut her off. "Clock's ticking. If you're someone who always roots for the underdog, you're about to love what happens next. But here's the thing. Most people watching right now aren't subscribed. Don't be like most people. Hit that button and prove you're here for the real stories." Lila moved to Flynn's side, the world narrowing to the space between her hands and his battered scalp. She spoke softly, almost like she was back in that burning wreck. "Captain Flynn, it's Lila," she said, fingers hovering before making contact. "I'm going to touch your head, okay?" His eyes slid open, unfocused, but searching for her voice. "Phoenix. 1-2, he murmured. "I'm right here," she said. Her fingertips pressed gently around the wound, mapping the contours of the swelling. She followed the ridge of the hematoma, not just where it bulged, but where it didn't. She checked along his temporal line, behind his ear, tracing a pattern only she seemed to see. Jordan whispered to no one in particular, "What is she doing?" Lila tuned him out. There, a point just above the ear where the tissue felt different, firmer, and where subtle pressure altered the way blood seeped from the laceration. She shifted her angle, pressed again, watched the flow below her fingers slow, then change direction. It clicked. She looked up, meeting Vance's impatient stare. "This isn't a brain bleed," she said. "It's a scalp arterial injury with a subfascial hematoma. The arteries torn and retracted under the scalp. The blood is pooling above the skull, not inside it." Bethany scoffed. "Based on what? Your feelings?" "Based on injuries I've seen in the field," Lila answered, not taking her eyes off Vance. "If you drill, you'll find a healthy brain and waste time while he keeps bleeding out into his scalp. He doesn't need a craniotomy. He needs the real source of the bleed controlled." Silence rolled through the trauma bay, heavier than any alarm. Flynn's hand twitched on the sheet, fingers curling as if reaching again for a salute. His gaze found hers for one brief, lucid second, trusting her like he had in the wreckage years ago. The monitors kept beeping. The CT image glowed accusingly from the tablet. And all at once, the question hanging over the room shifted from whether Lila should have spoken to whether anyone dared ignore her now. The silence felt like pressure in the room. Dr. Preston Vance finally broke it. "That's impossible," he snapped. "The CT clearly shows a subdural hematoma. We are not rewriting neurosurgery because a nurse has a feeling." Lila didn't flinch. "The CT shows blood accumulation," she said. "You're assuming it's intracranial. I'm telling you it's not." His eyes narrowed. "On what authority?" The old Lila, the one who let insults roll off and slipped back to the shadows, would have backed down right there. This version didn't. "On the authority of someone who's seen this before," she replied. "In the field, we called it a phantom hematoma. The artery tears and retracts into the scalp fascia. Blood pools above the skull, but on imaging it looks like a brain bleed until you trace the pattern." Jordan Mills glanced between the CT and Flynn. "I mean, is that even a thing?" he muttered, mostly to himself. Lila kept going. The swelling ridge, the blood flow change with pressure, the way his pupils are reacting. This is classic scalp arterial injury. If you drill, you'll find a healthy brain and a patient bleeding out from a vessel you never saw. Flynn's blood pressure monitor chirped again, more insistent now. 88/52, Jordan called. "He's tanking." Vance's jaw flexed. "We're losing perfusion. We don't have time for campfire stories about phantom injuries, Bennett." Jordan hesitated, then spoke up. "Doctor, with respect, if there's even a chance she's right, shouldn't we confirm her background?" Vance shot him an annoyed look. "Her background is that she's a recently hired RN." Jordan was already moving toward the computer terminal. "She said she served." He recognized her call sign. "If he's Special Forces or aircrew, there's going to be a file. I can access the liaison portal." Bethany scoffed. "Are we seriously doing this right now?" "No," Vance said sharply. "We are not—" Too late. Jordan had already typed in Garrett Flynn and scrolled. His face changed. Doctor?" Jordan's voice came out quieter. "You might want to see this." Vance snatched the tablet from him, irritation ready on his tongue, and then gone. On the screen, beneath Flynn's service details, sat a commendation report. Lila recognized the header even from a distance. Jordan read aloud, almost despite himself. "Air Force Pararescue Specialist Lila Bennett. 3 combat tours. 47 confirmed saves. Silver Star recommended." Bethany went pale. "You're kidding." Jordan kept going. "Citation notes rescue under fire of then-Lieutenant Garrett Flynn, following aircraft crash outside Kandahar." Every eye swung back to Lila. The room seemed to tilt, but she held her ground. Vance's pride flared in his eyes, but beneath it, something else sparked. Professional calculation, survival instinct for his patient. He handed the tablet back to Jordan and looked at Lila like he was seeing her for the first time. "Fine," he said tightly. "Show me what you see." The tension in her shoulders didn't ease, but it shifted. She moved closer to Flynn, her focus narrowing to wound, skin, pulse. "Captain Flynn," she said, voice low but steady. "It's Lila. You're not in Afghanistan. You're in Portland. You're at Riverside Memorial." He stirred, lids fluttering. "Phoenix," he whispered. "I've got you," she said. Again. She asked the anesthesiologist to hold off for a moment, then adjusted the headlamp so the beam caught every contour of the laceration. Her fingertips worked with a precision that didn't come from textbooks. "This is the entry line," she murmured more to herself, tracing the gash. "But the real problem is here." She pressed at that same spot above his ear where the tissue felt wrong. The blood flow slowed, then surged when she released. Jordan breathed out. It changed when she touched it. "It's retracted," Lila said. "The temporal artery snapped and pulled back into the scalp tissue. That's why it looks so dramatic on CT. It's all superficial, until he bleeds out from it." Flynn's pressure dipped again. 85/50. "If you operate now," she said to Vance, "you'll waste critical minutes looking at a brain that doesn't need you while the real bleed keeps going. He doesn't need his skull opened. He needs this artery found and controlled." Vance stared at her, then at the wound, then at the escalating numbers on the monitor. "Can you do it?" he asked. Her heart stumbled. "Yes," she said. Before fear could argue. "I've done it in worse places with less gear." Another beat of hesitation. Then Vance stripped off his outer gloves, grabbed a fresh pair, and snapped them on. He picked up a set of fine instruments and pressed them into her hands. "You saved him once," Vance said quietly. "Do it again." For a split second, every sound in the trauma bay blurred into a distant roar, rotors, gunfire, alarms, and then clicked back into focus. Lila adjusted her grip. Her hands were utterly steady. "Okay, Captain," she said, leaning over Flynn. "We're going to take care of that leak. I need you to hang on for me." His eyes opened a sliver, finding her. "Orders received," he rasped. She almost smiled. "That's what I like to hear." While Vance and Jordan gently retracted the wound edges, Lila followed the blood trail beneath the torn tissue, using pressure point techniques she'd learned in surgical tents and makeshift aid stations. "Come on," she murmured, teasing back a flap of swollen scalp. "Where are you hiding?" There, a tiny pulsing jet of red from a vessel tucked deep in the fascial layer. "Got you," she breathed. The room leaned in as she applied targeted pressure with a sterile pad, watching the flow slow, then halt. She worked quickly, using a modified ligature technique she'd adapted overseas, anchoring the artery without the luxuries trauma textbooks assumed you'd have. It was quiet except for the beeping of the monitors and the soft clicks of instruments. 1 minute, 2, 3. "BP climbing," Jordan said suddenly. 98/65. 102/70. Flynn's skin, once ashen, started to regain a hint of color. His breathing evened out. His pupils responded more symmetrically to the light from her headlamp. 4 minutes in, Lila tied off the final knot and gently released her supporting pressure. No fresh blood. No new pooling. "Bleeding controlled," she said, sitting back just enough for Vance to see clearly. He peered into the wound, then glanced at the CT, then at Flynn's improving vitals. No one reached for a drill. The brain he'd been ready to cut into remained untouched. Listen, if this story gave you chills, you need to subscribe. Because 9 out of 10 people watching won't, and they'll miss the next one just like this. Don't be the person who scrolls past and regrets it later. Subscribe right now. When Flynn's eyes opened again, clearer this time, they went straight to Lila. "Told you. You don't miss," he whispered, voice weak but threaded with something like pride. Lila felt something shift inside her, like a piece of herself she'd left in the desert had finally caught up. For the first time since she'd walked into Riverside Memorial, she wasn't just the quiet new nurse in golden scrubs. She was what she'd always been, a medic built for battle. Only now, the battlefield had fluorescent lights instead of stars. For a moment, no one moved. The monitors beside Captain Garrett Flynn glowed steady and strong. Heart rate stable, oxygen climbing, pressure evening out like a tide finally shifting to shore. Not a single drop of fresh blood welled beneath the dressing. Lila secured the final wrap with clean precision, her hands still rock steady, battlefield steady. Flynn blinked up at her, awareness flickering back into his gaze like someone slowly turning up a light inside his skull. He looked exhausted, gray at the edges, pain written across every line of his jaw, but present, alive. And he knew exactly who was standing over him. His right hand twitched, lifted. Slowly, laboriously, he raised it to his brow. Not shaky this time. Not accidental. A crisp salute. The trauma bay, chaotic seconds ago, fell into reverent silence. Lila felt something deep inside her crack open. Not pain, not fear. Something older. Something she thought she buried beside dusty uniforms and medals she could no longer bear to look at. This time, she didn't hesitate. She straightened, shoulders back, chin slightly raised, and returned the salute. Perfect form. Military sharp. A gesture that said, "I see you. I remember. We survived." Gasps whispered through the room like wind through leaves. Dr. Preston Vance was the first to break the spell. He peeled off his gloves slowly, as if each snap was stripping away denial. "Nurse Bennett." He exhaled, pride humbled into something human. "I owe you an apology. We all do." Bethany, who had rolled her eyes, mocked, doubted, looked suddenly small in her scrubs. "Why didn't you tell us?" she asked, voice thin, not accusatory, almost ashamed. Lila didn't gloat. She just answered honestly. Because I didn't want to be that person anymore. It wasn't an excuse. It was a truth. One that tasted raw coming out. Flynn's voice, hoarse but firm, filled the space next. She saved 4 lives that day in Kandahar, he said, looking around the room as if he wanted every person to feel the weight of it. Under fire. Under smoke and collapsing metal. She held us together when everything was breaking. Most people would have died just trying to get close. No one spoke. Flynn pushed on, because that was who he was, grit wrapped in bone. You've been working with a genuine American hero. His gaze landed on each stunned face. Maybe start treating her like one. Silence. Not distrust, not mockery. Something like respect settling into new territory. Jordan cleared his throat. Lila, why did you leave the military? Her expression shifted, shadow over sunlight. The answer was there, heavy behind her ribs, but not one she was ready to unwrap beneath bright hospital lights. That's... She looked at Flynn, then the floor. A different story. And everyone understood that meant it was a painful one. The team began prepping Flynn for transfer to recovery. Calmer now, more deliberate. No rush, no panic, just professional movement around a patient who would live because one nurse refused to stay silent. As they wheeled his stretcher toward the hallway, Flynn reached out, slow, shaking, to catch Lila's wrist. You'll visit? He asked. Not command, not expectation, just hope. We have things to talk about. She nodded once. I will. He smiled with his eyes, the same way he had when she dragged him out of burning metal years ago, and let go. The doors swung closed behind him. The trauma bay slowly emptied. Vance murmured orders. Bethany wiped counters with mechanical focus. Jordan cast glances in Lila's direction like he was seeing a puzzle that finally made sense. And then, one by one, they filed out, until only Lila remained beneath the still bright surgical lamps. The quiet settled like a blanket around her. For the first time in 5 years, the weight in her chest felt lighter. Not gone, but shifting, making space. She stood there alone, breathing antiseptic air instead of dust and smoke, and realized she didn't feel like an imposter anymore. Not a ghost. Not a coward hiding in plain sight. Just Lila Bennett. Nurse. Pararescue. Survivor. A woman who had saved a man in war, and again in peace. The path ahead was uncertain, lined with memories she hadn't finished grieving. But for the first time since Kandahar, she felt something she once thought she'd never feel again. Purpose. 2 hours later, the hospital had settled into the kind of tired quiet that only came after chaos. The halls were dimmer, footsteps softer, voices low. Lila stood outside Garrett Flynn's recovery room. Fingers curled around the edge of the chart she wasn't really reading. Her reflection in the small window looked like a stranger. Gold scrubs, tired eyes, a hospital badge that suddenly felt too small for the life behind it. She drew a breath and stepped inside. The room was mostly dark, lit by a single lamp near the bed. Flynn was propped up on a pillow, facial wound cleaned and neatly sutured, hair shaved back slightly where they'd worked. Bruises bloomed along his temple and jaw, but his eyes were clear. Hey, he said softly. You look different without all the blood. She managed a small smile. You look better without it. A monitor beeped steadily beside him, more metronome than warning now. Doc said you saved my life, Flynn went on. Again. He tilted his head. You okay? The question almost undid her right there. I'm fine, she lied, stepping closer to the foot of the bed. How's the head? Feels like I lost a fight with a helicopter rotor, he said. So, familiar. Silence settled for a moment. Not awkward, heavy, full of everything they hadn't said yet. You remember me, she said finally. It wasn't really a question. Flynn's expression softened. You kidding? He asked. Kandahar, the crash. That awful music you made me sing so I wouldn't pass out. He huffed a laugh. Somebody's daughter still walks this earth because you refused to let me close my eyes. Her throat tightened. I needed you conscious so I could monitor your airway, she said automatically. You kept asking me about her, he insisted. Her favorite cartoon, what she wanted for her birthday. You talked to me for 3 hours, Lila. 3 hours until they could get a second bird in and haul us out. I remember every minute. Real talk. If you're still watching without subscribing, you're doing it wrong. This story gets deeper, and you're going to want to see where it goes. Subscribe now before you forget. Seriously. Lila swallowed hard. The images came back sharp and merciless. Flame, metal, sweat. The weight of 4 wounded men, and one she couldn't reach in time. That mission went wrong, she whispered. Flynn's jaw flexed. Yeah, he said quietly. It did. She stared at the blanket bunched in her hands so she wouldn't have to look at him. There were 5 of you, she said. Everyone remembers the 4 I pulled out. No one likes to talk about the 5th. Monica Torres, Flynn said, voice reverent. Crew chief. Lila nodded, eyes burning. She was pinned deeper in the wreckage. Internal injuries. I knew, even before I got to her, what her chances were. Her fingers tightened on the fabric. I chose to stabilize you first. Your leg, your blood loss. You were closer. You were talking. Monica wasn't. The word hung there. Wasn't. By the time I got to her, she forced out, she was gone. Flynn watched her quietly. They gave me a medal for that mission, Lila said, her voice starting to shake. They stood me in front of a flag and read a citation about courage and sacrifice, like it balanced the equation. She blinked hard, tears finally breaking free. But Monica's mother wouldn't look at me at the funeral. She knew I had to choose, and I didn't choose her daughter. She pressed a hand over her mouth, but the rest spilled out anyway, the thing she'd carried like shrapnel for 5 long years. I've replayed it 1,000 times. If I'd gone to Monica first. If I'd risked more time in the wreck. If I... Stop! Flynn's voice cut through gently but firmly. She looked up, eyes wet and blazing. You made a triage decision, he said. You saved 4 lives, mine included. Without you, it would have been 5 deaths and a different funeral for my little girl back home. He held her gaze, his own eyes glistening. I was the aircraft commander, he went on. The mission orders came from me. The flight path, the risk profile, every checkbox that put us over that target at that exact moment, that was my call. If anyone wants to pin responsibility for Monica's death on someone, they can pin it on me. Lila shook her head. You weren't the one inside that wreck, deciding who got touched first. And you weren't the one who put us in the sky that night, he countered. We both carry weight from that mission, but don't you dare pretend you were the only one with blood on your hands. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time in 5 years, she didn't try to hold herself rigid. Tears slid freely down her cheeks. I thought if I saved enough people here, she said, voice breaking, in a normal hospital, under normal lights, it would balance out the one I couldn't save over there. I thought maybe one day the numbers would stop screaming at me. Flynn's brow furrowed. And has it? Has it helped? She let out a shaky breath. Until today? No. Today. She glanced at the bandage on his head, at the monitors humming steadily. Today, watching you come in like that, watching them almost open your skull for the wrong bleed, it hit me. Hit you how? He asked. That Monica's death wasn't about me failing, she said quietly. It was about war being what it is. Ugly, unfair, impossible choices in impossible conditions. Her gaze dropped. I still hate that she died. I always will. But for the first time, I'm starting to believe her death isn't the only line in my story. They sat in that for a moment, Two people linked by fire and metal, and the kind of guilt civilians would never fully understand. Flynn shifted, wincing, and reached toward the bedside table. "I've got something for you," he said. From a folder, he pulled out a folded paper and a small card. He held out the card. "She reached out to me last year," he explained. "Monica's mother. She wanted to talk about that night. Wanted to know every detail." He swallowed. "She asked about you. Said she'd been trying to find you. Not to blame you. To thank you." Lila stared at the card like it might explode. "She wanted to thank you for saving me," Flynn said, "so I could come home to my daughter. So someone she loved wouldn't have to live with two holes in their life instead of one." Lila pressed the card between her fingers, tears blurring the print. "I don't know if I can face her," she admitted. "Maybe not today," he said. "Maybe not tomorrow. But when you do, you won't be walking into that conversation as a failure. You'll be walking in as the woman who gave 4 families a second chance." Her shoulders shook. She didn't bother hiding it. For the first time since Kandahar, Lila let herself cry for Monica Torres, not as a mark against her own worth, but as a life that deserved to be grieved on its own terms. And beside her, battered but alive, Garrett Flynn bore witness, not as a patient, not as a superior officer, but as someone who understood exactly what it meant to walk out of a wreck that not everyone escaped. By the time Lila stepped through the sliding doors the next morning, the hospital felt different. Same fluorescent lights, same coffee smell, same low murmur of voices and rolling wheels. But the way people looked at her wasn't the same. The security guard at the entrance gave her a small nod instead of the usual bored glance. A tech from radiology, someone who'd never bothered to learn her name, actually said, "Morning, Lila." She almost looked over her shoulder to see if someone important was walking behind her. At the nurse's station, the conversations paused for half a heartbeat when she approached, not with hostility this time, with something closer to curiosity and respect that still felt too big to fit. Before she could clock in, Dr. Preston Vance appeared at the end of the hall. "Bennett," he called, "a word." The old reflex, "What did I do wrong?" flared for a second. She swallowed it and followed him. He led her to his office, pushed the door open, and gestured her inside. The blinds were half closed, morning light striping the room. On his desk, beside his laptop and a coffee that had gone cold, lay a neat stack of printed pages. Her name was on the top line. He lowered himself into his chair, steepled his fingers, and studied her for a moment. Then he tapped the papers. "I spent half the night reading this," he said. 3 tours. 47 documented saves. Recommendation for the Navy Cross. His gaze didn't waver. "Why are you working as a floor nurse, Lila?" Hearing her first name from him was almost as jarring as the question. She looked at the papers, at the tidy summaries of years that had nearly broken her. "Because I needed to start over," she answered. As someone who didn't carry all that weight. Someone who wasn't just war stories and casualty counts. Vance took that in, his expression losing some of its usual hard edges. "What you did yesterday," he said slowly, "that wasn't floor nursing. That was trauma expertise I don't have, that most of us don't have. Field diagnostic skills, improvisation under pressure. We're good at what we do here, but you brought something into that room that saved a man's life and his career." She shifted, uncomfortable under the praise. "I left the military because I couldn't handle the pressure anymore," she admitted. "The noise, the responsibility. I thought if I stayed in environments like that, it would eventually break me." Vance shook his head. "Yesterday, when it mattered, you handled it perfectly," he said. "You caught what I missed. You stood your ground when you had every reason to stay quiet. That's not someone who can't handle pressure. That's someone who's been carrying too much of it alone." He leaned back, studying her with the same focus he gave complex scans. "We need that experience," he said simply. "Not just for the dramatic cases, the everyday ones too. I'd like to offer you a position on the trauma team. Full privileges, not shadowing, not staying out of the way. A real seat at the table." Her heart kicked hard. "Trauma? Full time?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "With the understanding that your voice matters in that room. When you see something, we listen." Fear and something like hope collided in her chest. "And if I freeze one day?" she asked quietly. "If the memories hit too hard?" "Then we deal with it," Vance replied. "Like we would with any member of this staff who's seen too much. You don't get punished for being human here, Bennett. At least, not anymore." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I'll think about it," she said, then corrected herself. "No, I don't need to think about it. I accept." For the first time since she'd met him, Vance smiled. Not big, not flashy, but real. A soft knock interrupted them. A knock. Bethany would have barged in yesterday. "Come in," Vance called. Bethany eased the door open, eyes flicking between them. She held a folder like a shield. "I can come back," she started. "It's fine," Vance said. "We're done." He stood. "Conference room in 10 minutes, Bennett. Don't be late." Then he slipped past Bethany and left them alone. The silence that followed wasn't the old brittle kind. Bethany cleared her throat. I needed to talk to you," she said, closing the door more than usual behind her. "For a second." Lila braced herself. "I owe you an apology," Bethany said, words tumbling faster now that they'd started. "A real one. I was threatened by you from day one. You walked in here with this quiet confidence, like you knew what you were doing without needing anyone's approval. And instead of dealing with my own insecurity, I made you small so I could feel bigger." She swallowed, looking down. "That was wrong. You didn't deserve it. And after yesterday, I'm sorry, Lila." Lila watched her, the woman who'd tossed so many little cuts her way, now standing there without armor. "Thank you," Lila said. "I appreciate you saying that." It wasn't some grand speech. It didn't need to be. Bethany's shoulders dropped a fraction in relief. Jordan appeared in the doorway then, knocking his knuckles lightly against the frame. "Interrupting?" he asked. "Apparently that's the new rule around here," Bethany muttered, but there was the hint of a smile. "Vance sent me," Jordan Mills said to Lila. "The staff wants to meet with you. Conference room." The walk there felt strangely like heading into a briefing. When she stepped inside, the room was full. Nurses, techs, residents, attendings, faces she'd passed 100 times without really being seen. Now they were all turned toward her. On the table sat a small wooden plaque. "In recognition of Lila Bennett, RN," Jordan read aloud, "whose expertise and courage exemplify the finest traditions of medical service." There was no mention of ranks or ribbons, no unit names, just her name, her license, and what she'd done here. Vance stepped forward. "This isn't about your military record," he said, "though it's impressive as hell. This is about the colleague who stood in our trauma bay yesterday and reminded all of us what it looks like to put the patient first, even when it's uncomfortable." He held her gaze. "We'd be honored if you'd join our trauma team, Lila. Full member. No more standing against the wall unless you choose to. Your voice matters here." The room was quiet, waiting. Lila looked at the plaque. At the faces, some embarrassed, some proud, some still trying to reconcile the woman in golden scrubs with the reports they'd heard overnight. If this moment doesn't make you want to subscribe, I don't know what will. This is the kind of story you'll want to share with everyone you know. Hit that subscribe button and join the community that celebrates real heroes. For once, she didn't feel like she had to choose between Sergeant Bennett and Nurse Bennett. She lifted her chin. "I'd be honored to join," she said. Applause broke out. Not thunderous, but warm. Real. A beginning, not an ending. For the first time since she left the desert behind, Lila felt her past and present stop fighting each other and start standing on the same side. 1 week later, the trauma bay felt like a different world because she walked through it as a different woman. Lila Bennett, now wearing the deep navy trauma team colors instead of generic gold scrubs, moved confidently through the organized chaos. A multi-car pileup had just rolled in. 3 patients, 1 critical, 2 stable, but shaken. The bay buzzed with urgency, but she didn't feel the old tremor in her bones. She felt present, focused, home. Dr. Preston Vance barked orders at one end of the room while Jordan Mills evaluated vitals at another. Lila stepped between them, checking the airway on a teenage boy with a chest contusion and glass scoring his cheek. "Breath sounds diminished on the left," she noted. "Possible pneumothorax. We need a chest tube prepped. Now." A month ago, someone might have challenged her. Today, Vance didn't miss a beat. "Prep 1," he said to Jordan. "Follow her lead." It should have felt strange. It didn't. Later, while suturing a laceration, Bethany handed Lila instruments without being asked. No side comments, no raised brows, just teamwork. Respect earned not through medals or rumors, but through skill, presence, and choices in the face of pressure. Call-outs, glances, nods. Every small interaction painted a picture of integration. A once fractured identity was stitching itself back together, one steady breath at a time. By afternoon, the trauma bay finally slowed. Lila washed her hands. Water warm over tired skin. That's when Jordan appeared beside her. "Lobby," he said with a faint smile. "Someone's waiting." A flicker of nerves pulsed through her. She dried her hands and walked out. Garrett Flynn stood near the hospital entrance, fully dressed. Posture straight, even with the fading bruises along his face. The sutures were neat lines now, scars that would one day look like stories rather than wounds. He held an envelope in one hand. He looked better, alive in a way she hadn't seen since Afghanistan. "I'm being discharged," he said. "I heard." She smiled. It felt real. Easy. He offered her the envelope. "It's Monica's mother's address," he explained softly. "No pressure, but I think it would help you both." Lila held it for a moment before tucking it into her chest pocket, close to her heart. "I'll reach out," she said. And she meant it. Flynn exhaled, relief crossing his face like a shadow moving off sunlight. "You gave me my life back twice," he said. "Once in Kandahar, once here. You gave me the chance to see my daughter grow up. There aren't words big enough for that kind of debt." She shook her head gently. "You gave me something too," she told him. "You reminded me that the person I was in Afghanistan, she wasn't just about one moment of loss. She was about dozens of moments of saving lives." They stood there in shared quiet. 2 survivors whose paths had crossed in fire once and light now. Flynn lifted his hand. Another salute. Steady. Grateful. Lila returned it without hesitation. No flashbacks this time. No guilt. Just mutual honor. "So," he said finally, "see you around?" "Yeah," she said. "See you around, Captain." He left through the main doors into the late afternoon sunlight. Lila watched him go, feeling something close inside her and open at the same time. Hours passed. Shift done. Scrub shirt exchanged for a clean one. She found herself outside the hospital chapel, a space she'd walked past 100 times but never entered. Tonight, she pushed the door open. It was quiet, warm, filled with soft amber light. She stepped to the front pew and sat, hands clasped loosely. After a moment, she slid her bag into her lap and unzipped it. Inside, wrapped in a small cloth, were her dog tags, untouched since she left the Air Force. She held them up, metal cool against her fingers, reflecting dim light like tiny mirrors. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you, Monica," she whispered, "but I'm going to keep saving others in your honor." Her voice didn't shake this time. Lila slipped the chain over her head, tucking it beneath her scrubs. The metal lay warm against her skin, no longer a symbol of guilt, but a promise renewed. Her phone buzzed sharply. "Mass casualty alert. All trauma personnel report immediately." She stood, no hesitation. Shoulders back, chin set, heartbeat calm, not despite the alarm, but because of it. She walked toward the exit, boots soft against chapel tile. As she approached the glass wall overlooking the ER, she caught her reflection. Confident, grounded, whole. Not hiding, not running. Phoenix 1-2, reborn. And when she pushed through the trauma bay doors again, it wasn't like stepping back into war, it was stepping into purpose. Phoenix 1-2 wasn't just a call sign, it was a promise. And promises don't die just because you take off the uniform. This story is dedicated to all medical professionals, military and civilian, who carry the weight of lives they've saved and lives they couldn't. Your service matters. Your sacrifice matters. You matter. Before you go, if this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. These are the stories that remind us what real courage looks like. And if you've made it this far without subscribing, what are you even doing? Fix that right now. See you in the next one.